This is Rizal, Jose Rizal. Everyone in the Philippines knows him. In almost every city there is a statue of him. But what almost nobody knows, the most important months of his life, they happened here, in Heidelberg.
In Germany, he was considered as a freedom fighter who wanted to free his country from colonialism.
This is Dr. Fritz Hack Ulmer. His great-grandfather lived here in the house that is now on Jose Rizal Strasse. Later, he will tell us a story about how Rizal spent his 25th birthday here, along with a few insights that are documented nowhere else. This house is indirectly responsible for the end of 300 years of Spanish colonial rule. It is also indirectly responsible for his later death. The Philippines was a Spanish colony. The church controlled almost everything. Speaking up was dangerous. And the native Filipino population, the Indios as the Spanish called them, were second-class citizens in their own country. Rizal's family was different. His father owned land. His brother sent him money. By Philippine standards, he had every advantage. He came to Heidelberg for one reason: this building. At the time, the University Eye Clinic, home to Professor Otto Becker, one of the best ophthalmologists in Europe. Rizal rented a room in this building, not far from the clinic, and he waited for the money from home. But in February 1886, it hadn't arrived. Heidelberg was expensive, and a 24-year-old broke Filipino, alone in Germany, needed a solution. What happened next, neither he nor anyone else could have planned. On a Sunday afternoon, a Protestant pastor from a neighboring village was walking with his family along this path, the Philosopher's Walk.
He addressed the young man, and he found out that his German was still very poor. They talked around, and suddenly the pastor found out that Rizal spoke perfectly Latin. And so the first conversation was in Latin and not in German.
Rizal told him everything, that he was a visiting doctor at the University Eye Clinic, that he had arrived 2 months ago, that he was alone, and he told him about the money.
The money of his brother Paciano, the pesos had not arrived in time. So Rizal was very short of money, and so he asked the pastor whether he wouldn't find in the faraway village in the Odenwald, couldn't find him a cheaper location. He said to the pastor, "Can't you find me a home?" And the pastor was looking around and made arrangements.
But Rizal had one condition. He needed to learn High German, not a dialect like in the villages. Ulmer went back to Wilhelmsfeld and asked around, but there was only one family in the entire village that spoke standard German, his own. So they opened their home for Rizal.
Every morning before he went to the hospital, Rizal had 1 hour of German by the pastor, and the pastor used the Schiller's Wilhelm Tell as the textbook for teaching German.
Wow.
And it's amazing. It just shows how intelligent and how gifted Rizal was. That is not easy to understand.
Not easy, yeah.
His new home is 11.5 kilometers from the clinic. No cars, no train connection. Google Maps says 2.5 hours.
Rizal was obviously very well trained. It took him less than 2 hours to go uphill, and to go downhill, he made it in about 70 minutes to the hospital.
Every evening, Rizal came home from the clinic and sat down to dinner with the Ulmer family. And he talked about the Philippines, about 300 years of colonial rule, about a people without rights, without a voice in their own country. One evening, Ulmer looked at him and said, That is the story of Schiller's Wilhelm Tell, a Swiss hero who fought against foreign oppression. He had been in this house for less than 2 months. But on the 19th of June, the Ulmer family would do something that made clear.
And this was not a hotel, that was a temporary home for someone who hadn't had one for years.
6 years before Rizal arrived in Heidelberg, something happened at home that would change the direction of his entire life. His mother, Teodora Alonso, was losing her sight. Teodora was not just his mother. She was the person who had taught him to read, who had read him stories as a child, who had shaped the way he thought about language, about justice, about the world. She was, by every account, the most formative person in his life. And now she was going blind. And nobody in the Philippines could help her. Rizal was studying law at the time, but made a decision that tells you everything about who he was. He changed his entire field of study to medicine, just because his mother needed an eye operation and he was going to learn how to perform it himself. That is why he ended up here, in Heidelberg, under one of the best eye surgeons in Europe. Every morning he walked 16,000 steps to this clinic and back. Every day he studied procedures that barely existed yet, and somewhere in the back of his mind, the entire time, was one face. Now think about what that means in practice. He left the Philippines at 20. He spent years in Madrid, in Paris, now in Germany. Every year away from home is another year his mother's eyes are getting worse. Every month the money is late is another month he cannot finish his training. He is racing against time, and he knows it. And yet, in the evenings after the clinic, after the long walk back, he sat down in this house in Wilhelmsfeld and he wrote, not letters home, a novel. Because saving his mother was the personal mission, but there was a second one, larger, older, and in many ways, more urgent. Remember, the Philippines had been a colony for 300 years. His people had no voice, and Rizal had decided that the most powerful weapon he had was not a gun, it was a book. He had started writing it in Madrid. He had continued in Paris, and here, in a small house in the Odenwald, with a pastor's family asleep down the hall, he was finishing it. Noli Me Tangere. Latin, don't touch me. A phrase from the Gospel of John, the words Christ speaks to Mary Magdalene after the resurrection. Do not hold on to me. Rizal used it as a warning to the church, to the Spanish crown, to everyone who had spent 300 years holding on to a people that was not theirs to keep. The manuscript was almost done. His birthday was 1 week away. And Mary Ulmer had a problem. There was no Filipino food anywhere nearby. José Rizal turns 25 today. He is in a small German village. His family is on the other side of the world. His mother is waiting. The novel is almost done. And Mary Ulmer, the pastor's wife, has a problem she has been trying to solve for a week.
Karl, wir haben kein Reis.
Rizal had one wish for his birthday, Filipino food, specifically adobo, which required rice.
In Wilhelmsfeld, there was no food store available which had rice. So Mary Ulmer went to Heidelberg and bought rice. And she came back, and it was about a week before, and she said, Jose, you have to teach me how to cook the rice the way you like it. And they cooked it, and Rizal said, oh, that is sticky rice. I don't like sticky rice.
No!
So Mary had to go to another place outside of Heidelberg. This is Mannheim. she had to travel almost 2 hours to Mannheim. And there was a store where they had non-sticky rice. And so at the meal, non-sticky rice was served to the Avalos.
At his birthday, there were a Protestant pastor, a Catholic priest, a Filipino doctor, sitting at the same table in a small village, Germany, eating adobo with rice from Mannheim. In the Philippines at that time, Protestant and Catholic communities barely spoke to each other. Here, they shared a meal and probably 2 glasses of wine.
We always drink 2. Sometimes even more.
Which brings us to something that happened around this time. Something that tells you more about Karl Ulmer than any biography could. When Rizal moved into the vicarage, someone in Wilhelmsfeld was not happy about it. This person wrote a letter to the bishop in Karlsruhe.
Pastor Ulmer has accepted a brown man in his vicarage. He will never come into heaven because of this.
The bishop forwarded the complaint to Ulmer, and Ulmer wrote back.
Dear sir, you write we have accepted a black Muslim in our community. It's not a black Muslim. It's an ophthalmologist in training at the Heidelberg University Hospital, and he is not a Muslim, but is a confessing Catholic. He comes to our 2-weekly get-together with a Catholic priest, Heinrich Bardorf, and Karl Ulmer.
Karl Ulmer did not just give Rizal a room and home. He gave him something rarer, the experience of being accepted completely, of sitting at a table where nobody saw a colonial subject, just a person. For someone who had spent his entire life watching his people being treated as second-class citizens in their own country, that meant something.
When Rizal came to Wilhelmsfeld, this was the first time he got into contact with non-Catholics. And in addition, he saw the friendship between the Catholic priest and the Protestant pastor. This was something very, very unusual. So Rizal saw only the different religions were fighting against each other. And here were 2 confessing Christians who did not fight each other and left it, as I pointed out in the anecdote, and left it to our Heavenly Father to decide which is the right thing.
He lived here until the end of July 1886. Less than 3 months in total. But when he left, he took something with him that no clinic in Europe could have taught him. The memory of what it felt like to be treated as an equal, and a finished manuscript. On August 5th, 1886, Rizal left Heidelberg. His next stop, Leipzig, where a printer was waiting. Leipzig in the late 19th century was one of the publishing capitals of the world. Here, Rizal started looking for a way to turn his dangerous manuscript into a real book. A few months later, in Berlin, a printer finally agreed. With money loaned by his friend Maximo Viola, 2,000 copies of Noli Me Tangere came off the press in March 1887. 2,000 copies of a novel written by a 25-year-old Filipino doctor in Spanish about colonial oppression, printed in Germany for a country on the other side of the world.
When Rizal left Heidelberg, the first longer stop were 3 weeks in Leipzig, where he wanted the Noli Me Tangere to be printed. And in these 3 weeks, Rizal translated the whole Noli Me Tangere into Tagalog. And the book is still available in the Philippines. If you go to the museum in Manila, you will find it.
The book reached the Philippines, and the Spanish authorities reacted exactly as Rizal had expected them to. Noli Me Tangere was banned immediately. Possession of the book was punishable. The church declared it heretical. The government declared Rizal an enemy of the state. And Filipinos read it anyway. Because Rizal had done something no one had done before. He had written in the voice of his own people. He had named the abuse. He had described the corruption, the cruelty, the humiliation, not as an abstract political argument, but as a story, with characters who felt real because they were real. Every Filipino who read it recognized someone they knew on its pages. The novel did not start a revolution directly, but it started something harder to stop.
Thank you, po.
The belief that things could be different. But revolutions have a cost, and someone always pays it. After Leipzig, Rizal kept moving. Berlin, Brussels, London, Madrid again. He was wanted in the Philippines, so he stayed in Europe, wrote a second novel, continued his medical work, corresponded with scholars across the continent. But the one thing he had come to Europe for was still unfinished. His mother was waiting. In 1891, Rizal moved to Hong Kong, far enough from Spanish reach, close enough to home. He opened a small medical practice, and he sent word to his family, "Bring her to me." Teodora Alonso made the journey from Calamba to Hong Kong. She was in her 60s, nearly blind. Her son examined her eyes, and then he operated. The operation was successful. Teodora Alonso could see again, could read again, could write again. The boy who had changed his entire life's direction so that his mother would not lose her sight, he had done it. In a clinic in Hong Kong, with techniques he had learned in Heidelberg, under a professor he had found because a pastor in Wilhelmsfeld had opened his door. Everything connected, everything had been worth it. But then, he went home. After 10 years in Europe, after the novel, the second novel, the international recognition, after all of it, he went home. The Spanish authorities arrested him almost immediately. He was exiled to Dapitan, a remote town in Mindanao, in the south of the Philippines. No travel, no publishing, no political activity. He built a school, treated patients for free, designed a water system for the town, continued writing, continued drawing. He spent 4 years in exile, and he never stopped. In 1896, the Philippine Revolution began. Filipinos took up arms against Spain. Rizal had not organized it, had not called for it, had repeatedly argued for reform over rebellion. But the Spanish authorities needed someone to blame, and there was one name everyone knew: José Rizal. They arrested him, charged him with rebellion, sedition, and conspiracy. The trial was a formality. On the evening of December 29th, 1896, he wrote his final poem in his cell in Fort Santiago, Manila. He titled it Mi Ultimo Adios, My Last Farewell.
Farewell, dear fatherland, clime of the sun-caressed, pearl of the Orient seas, our Eden lost. With gladness I give thee my life's withered best. And were it more brilliant, more fresh, or more blessed, still would I give it thee, nor count the cost.
He did not call for revenge. He did not curse his executioners. He wrote about the land he loved, about the morning light over the Philippines, about dying freely for something worth dying for. On the day of his execution, he asked to face the sky when they shot him. A quiet request. It was denied. They made him face away from the firing squad, as traitors were executed. On December 30th, 1896, at the age of 35, José Rizal was killed by a Spanish firing squad. A family opened their Frankfurt newspaper, a small note from Manila. Their former guest, their table companion, the young man who had taught them to cook rice, had been executed.
Fritz Ullmer wrote the first memorial text about José Rizal and his ideas and his fight for freedom in German. There is still a very nice poem, and to my knowledge, nobody has written something similar in these days about Rizal. He was a rebel and he was an outcast and something, but in Germany he was considered as a freedom fighter who wanted to free his country from colonialism.
Rizal came to Germany to save his mother's eyes. He never came back, but he changed the lives of millions of people, including his mother's. Today, memorial statues of Rizal can be found in almost every Philippine city, such as here in Bacolod and Dumaguete, as well as in the small village of Wilhelmsfeld, Germany. The path between Wilhelmsfeld and Heidelberg is today called the Rizal Historic Trail. In Heidelberg, there is a Rizal embankment and various plaques on the relevant buildings. The Consulate General in Frankfurt is displaying the remaining furniture from the pastor's estate. The Ullmers donated all the other items to Manila. Because that is what the Ullmers do. They open the door and they don't ask for anything in return.
Cheerio.